Welcome back to Bible Bites. I'm Gabe. Thank you for joining. Today we're going to talk about John chapter 4. If you hadn't picked up the pattern by now from watching the previous videos, or if you're new to the Bible readings that we're doing here, John's chapters, individual chapters, tend to break down into two major events per chapter. They each have their own object lesson, something to take away from them, but in general, they'll break down into major events. In this case, we're going to talk about two happenings that involve Jesus. The first one is his encounter with a Samaritan woman on his travels and while he stops to take a rest. The second one involves Jesus' encounter with a royal official on his way to Cana in the region of Galilee. And that one is a healing lesson. The first one is more of a prophecy lesson. So let's talk about that a little bit. So in the first part of the book, Jesus is walking along the road with his disciples. He's been walking for hours, miles, in some cases even days, and he stops to take a rest at a well. And this was the well of Jacob. And he sees next to that well a woman who is a Samaritan woman. And he says, would you be so kind as let me have a drink of water because you're pulling up the water from the well? And she says, who are you to talk to me about asking for water? Aren't you a Jew? Now, remember, at this time, Samaritans and Jews did not associate with each other socially or whenever possible. Samaritans were considered mixed race. They were Jews who intermixed with other races of people from surrounding countries. So from a Jewish point of view, culturally speaking, Samaritans were considered less than or unclean or whatever word you want to use, but they were considered half-breeds or mixed breeds, and they didn't want anything to do with them. So for a Jew to approach a Samaritan just in a cordial, friendly, hey, could you do me a favor kind of way was a little bit of unheard of at that time. But he said, just need a drink of water. I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much. And then they start chatting a little bit. And she talks about her experience being just a Samaritan woman. He automatically picks up on who she is and what she's all about. And then the conversation kind of leads to the aspect of salvation and God and heaven and what it means to be not saved necessarily, because that was sort of a new concept at that time, but just to be in God's favor, if you will. And he starts telling her that he is the Messiah. And she says, I don't believe you. That doesn't make any sense. And he says, go get your husband and tell him the things that I've told you and see if he believes. And she says, well, I don't have a husband. And he says, yes, I know. Not only do you not have a husband, you've been shacking up with 5 other guys. And then she's suddenly struck. She's like, I've never met this man before. I didn't tell him any details about my life, but he knew about my life. He knew what I was all about. He knew I was Samaritan. He knew that I was, kind of getting around town, as it were. And he's telling me things that I already know. So at the very least, he has the power of prophecy, and he could be the Messiah that we've heard of in our teachings and our writings. So she rushes back to town and she says, there's a guy over by the well. I think he might be the Christ. We should go check this out. So they come back and they talk a little bit and they start to, kind of get convinced, just like she was, that he's the Messiah. So when the apostles come back to catch up with Jesus, because they originally left to go get some food while he was resting, and they said, here, he eats some food. He's like, I've got the food that really counts, which is I'm spreading the word, and the information that came from the Old Testament, all the work that was done by the prophets of old, like Moses, like Isaac, like Abraham, have planted the seeds for people to be ready, like you see right here. Now it's time for us to reap, and that will be the ultimate food, the spiritual food I need that will sustain me through anything. And in juxtaposition to that, part of the conversation that Jesus had with the Samaritan woman was talking about living water, where he says, you have given me the physical water that I need to slake my thirst, but I have the spiritual water which will quench your spiritual thirst for all of eternity. And that sort of leads into this juxtaposition, or I should say this pairing of food and drink together as metaphors for the needs and the wants of somebody's spirit and their soul. So that leads to him staying in town for a few days, spreading the word and the gospel, and leading many people to become followers of Jesus Christ, which is a good thing. So there are a couple lessons that come out of that. One of which is he made it very clear up front that the social separations and the cultural separations mean nothing to God. If the Samaritan was considered somebody you didn't associate with as a Jew, he just broke right through that barrier and just kept going. And then as soon as he made it clear that he didn't care about those stigmas or those barriers, his entire focus is on spreading the word, teaching the gospel, making sure everybody understood why he was there, why he was a Messiah, and what his mission was to gain followers. And that is his fundamental focus, even at a visceral level, because he's equating reaping and sowing um, people to become followers with the fundamental needs of food and drink. So he's equating now the fundamental need of food and drink with the fundamental needs of the spirit and to be restored in that connection with God. So that's a big deal about how we are supposed to act as Christians within our culture, dealing with people from other races, from other religions, from other societies, and how they're raised. Jesus doesn't care about any of that. He recognizes it's there, but he's willing to move right past it to say, I'm going to give you something that's more important than any social separation you can imagine. Then we move over to a few days later, and Jesus continues on his journey after staying a couple days in town, and he's walking along the road with his disciples, and he's approached by a royal official from Galilee, and he says, please, I hear you're a healer. I hear you're the Christ. I need you to come heal my son who's deathly sick. He's going to die. Please. And Jesus says, I'm walking, I'm busy, but why have you approached me? What do you want? And you see that theme over and over again, that when people approach Jesus for help, he sometimes will question them to test them to make sure they say out loud and articulate out loud their motivations for why they're asking him and what they truly believe. Not just asking for selfish reasons, but asking out of a firm faith and belief that Jesus is the Christ and is the Messiah that has come from God. And he says, I believe in you. I hear what you're doing. And I fully recognize that you are the Messiah. And if anybody can heal my son, you can. And Jesus says, okay, I got you. I hear you. You're good. You're fine. Your son will now be healed. Go away. The royal official goes back to find his son. And then Jesus keeps walking. A little bit later, somebody catches up to Jesus to tell him that the son was healed. And we find out a little bit later in that story that the moment Jesus said, your son will be healed, go get out of here, is the exact moment the son was healed. So what do we see from this is, number one, Jesus tends to ask probing questions to make sure your motivations in your heart is right when you're praying for stuff and when you're asking for stuff. Even though he knows who you are, he wants you to say it and he wants you to articulate it, partly to expose yourself to the truth of what you really want. The second thing is, we see here a second major miracle from the book of John. The first one was turning the water into wine, and now we're back in Galilee, which is the same place where that first miracle occurred. And now he's healing somebody who's deathly sick from a distance. And that's the other piece of it too, is Jesus didn't need to be physically present or lay hands or do any of those things to heal somebody who was sick. Just from speaking it out loud, your son's going to be healed, from however far away the son was, that miracle was able to occur. And so that means that God's power extends anywhere in the world. It's not necessarily limited to one specific location or by the physical act of touching, as it were. So there we have it, Book of John, chapter 4, two big deal stories. The first one dealing with the social stigmas of the relationship between Jews and Samaritans and how Jesus was able to look right past that, because he said, my number one goal is to do the most important thing. You feed your body with water and food. I'm going to feed your soul. And we're going to look past all your social stigmas, all your cultural divides, because none of that matters in the grand scheme of what's important to God. And then we have the second scenario where a royal official asks for healing. And we see this repetitive behavior from Jesus where he asks you, me, or anyone else that needs prayer to articulate why you're asking him, because he wants to ensure that you can articulate it out loud, and also for you to see it for yourself, that it has to be a profession of faith, which this royal official does. And then the son is healed, but not healed from laying on hands, but healed from a distance. So let me know what you think. Read John chapter 4. Let me know your impressions of what stood out to you, because there's a lot of different pieces in here. And leave a comment down below. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and thank you for joining.